It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Craig, I want to start with you. As a summer resident of Nantucket, perhaps there was a little bit of disappointment on the island that the first plane from Texas with immigrants was landing in Martha's Vineyard. But boy, this is a really new day in politics with these flights coming in from Florida and from Texas, as well as other border states, presumably down the road. Will it have a political impact? I mean, there is some feeling that Florida and Texas and those border states are paying a disproportionate amount of responsibility for this. What's your thoughts?
Well, first, it's good to be back in Talbot County. I'm here on Trip Creek. Those islands up there in the Northeast are getting a lot of attention. We didn't have the immigrants flying in, but George W. Bush flew in actually earlier this week to give a talk on leadership on the island. So a lot going on there. You know, I guess I want to start on this discussion by saying and reinforcing the fact that the immigration issue is a really serious problem. And it has been going on for a long, long time. I actually really encountered it and encountered the vitriol in the debate with my good friend Pete Wilson out in California. And in 1994, there was a ballot measure that was kind of a desperation move, Proposition 187. And after really years of Governor Wilson talking about the problems in California, all these illegal immigrants coming in and receiving, demanding, taking time in schools and in hospitals and all those kinds of services, this proposition said, well, if you're an illegal immigrant, we're not going to give you those services. Your kids aren't going to go to school. And one could argue whether he should have endorsed the proposition or not. He did. To this day, he's accused by some of, doing something that was racist in its overtones. He denies that. I mean, and I don't believe him to be in any sense of the word a racist, but it was a bitter, bitter fight way back then. And it hasn't, not only has it not gotten better, it's getting worse. The statistics I saw for 2019 said there's under 1 million encounters between people trying to get into the country and customs. Same sampling, we're already at almost 2 million so far this year of these encounters between customs and immigrants. So the problem is real, and there's no question the border communities feel it more than others. Nobody's innocent in this. The Biden administration came in saying they're going to walk away from what Trump was doing, and suddenly, guess what? We had a lot more people trying to get into the country. We didn't really have a framework passed through Congress of how to deal with that. They can't work for the first 6 months, so now charities and all these non-governmental organizations are totally strapped to help them, and so it's almost embarrassing, frankly. But now you have governors who are seeking re-election who've decided to make a point of this by sending these people as almost pawns in a political game, sending them to Martha's Vineyard and other outside the vice president's residence. And it's guaranteed to make news. It may even help them in their own races. I don't know, but it is doing nothing to really solve this problem. And I think that's what we need to focus on.
Al, what's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I agree with Craig very much. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last time Congress has done a really comprehensive major immigration bill was in 1986, when Craig was still in the White House, the Simpson-Mazzoli bill. So it's not like, both parties have had made attempts. George W. Bush made some really good attempts. There was an attempt during the Obama administration, but nobody really, in the end, the extremes in both parties don't want the issue solved because they wanted the issue and not the solution. And so it continues to go on. But two things can be true at once. That's what Joe Scarborough has taught me. And you know, and what DeSantis and Abbott are doing is cruel. It's inhumane. But we also do have a serious crisis at the border. To me, I read an interview last night in Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg of Yair Lapid, the Prime Minister of Israel, and he said that Israel needed to be strong and moral, and I think that those would be two good principles for dealing with our immigration crisis. What Abbott and DeSantis are doing, they're trying to focus the debate in the country on immigration, and it's what we've talked about here for the last several months. If this election turns on inflation and immigration and border security and crime, the Republicans will have a red wave. If it turns on democracy, preserving democracy, on abortion, on Donald Trump, the Democrats will do a lot better. And so both parties have made their efforts. Biden made his speech in Philadelphia where he tried to frame the election on his terms. And these antics are really trying to frame the election on theirs. And let me just give you a couple of numbers of why. In the latest NBC poll, if you ask which party people trust more on border security, Republicans win by 36. If you ask on crime, they win by 23 points. If you ask on the economy, it's 19, and probably if you separate it out, inflation would even be greater. But if you ask which party will protect democracy better, Democrats win by 7, and on abortion, they win by 22. So basically, what DeSantis and Abbott are doing are trying to help their party by framing the election on their terms.
Well, there's no doubt they're doing it. I guess the question becomes, well, okay, guys, you made your point. Now what? This is one of these issues where, where you sit as a governor looks very different than sitting on Capitol Hill in Congress or at the White House, because as a governor, you're dealing with it every day. I think if I was to advise Biden or his chief of staff, I'd say get on the phone, call the National Governors Conference, tell these governors, rather than to put these poor immigrants on a chartered plane, to get their rear end on the chartered plane and come to Washington and sit down and let governors and executive branch officials work out a solution. This is just almost, it's just shameful. There's no solution here. The point's been made. We get it, but you ought to stop doing something that's, harmful to the very people that we ought to be, protecting, or at least handling with some humanity.
It shouldn't fall only on the border states to deal with this problem. It's a national policy problem. And, it also, Craig, you'll remember this, this isn't a new problem. When I was in the Carter White House, we had the Mario boat lift from Cuba, and Jimmy Carter decided to send a lot of the immigrants from Cuba who came over on that boat lift to Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. And there was a particular young governor in Arkansas who thought it cost him his election, named Bill Clinton. So, this has been potent politics over the years. And it's unfortunate because, look, my father was an immigrant. We all came from somewhere, and the American value is to welcome immigrants.
It's very difficult to assume this is going to get better. I think it should be noted that when people were paying attention to this issue, the last time, it was the vice president who was put in charge of this challenge. And so I wonder about her political fate in all this. But what's your forecast?
Asking the vice president to step in and settle this was probably not her most favorite day in office. And her task was focused on trying to deal with the immigrants coming from particular countries and what could we do to slow that down in those countries. We have a hard time dealing with the leaders in our own country, let alone the leaders in other countries. I hope where it goes is that there's heightened awareness. I started with my example of Pete Wilson, and Al had some good ones too. Pete Wilson is a longtime friend. He was a remarkable governor of San Diego and did a lot to bring that city to where it is today and lead an organized development of that city. In a park there was a statue of Pete Wilson. It was torn down only a few years ago because of what he did with this Proposition 187 and trying to deny illegal immigrant services. And I cite that because, what these governors are doing can have long-lasting impact on their own legacies. They think there's short-term gain here. Pulling these kind of stunts and offering no solution, not stepping forward and being part of constructive dialogue on this, but just getting press, it impacts them. Frankly, it impacts the Republican Party when they're Republicans. And it is very harmful to people who are, in many cases, just desperate for a better life. They come here for a reason. It's a pretty desperate situation that they're trying to get themselves out of. And we've got to find a way to help them get work. I really believe we have to find a pathway to citizenship if that's what they're seeking. But it's going to take serious people sitting down and having serious discussions to get there and not publicity stunts.
Great. Al, you have the last word.
I wish I could be optimistic, but the last 35 or 40 years have indicated that it's very hard. I mean, people ought to take a look in the Republican Party, they ought to think about Pete Wilson. Pete Wilson scared Hispanic voters for 3 decades from voting away from the Republican Party. And it probably cost them the presidency, for example, in 2012. One of the worst things about politics is politicians think in the short term. And, DeSantis is trying to position himself as the heir to Trump. And he's got an election, and maybe all that'll work. I frankly agree with David Brooks of the New York Times, who doesn't worry about DeSantis because I don't think he's going anywhere as a national candidate. But that's neither here nor there. Politicians think short term. But the most important thing that I wish we could get across, and maybe this is something that Joe Biden ought to try to do after the election, is you got to make people think about the long-term consequences of an issue. And, the country can't continuously have these kind of divisive issues, especially because they're solvable. This country has the capacity to have what Tom Friedman called a tall gate with a big door. And we can be, as Lapid said, both strong in defending our border and safeguarding our border, and moral in doing what has always been the American thing to do.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.